to try and explain why the character of Sethi rubbed me up the wrong way, I'm going to share something a little bit personal. I read the Pulitzer Prize winning novel Beloved by Nobel laureate Toni Morrison, and I didn't like it. Hello Mark, welcome to the book thing, and today I'm going to try and explain to you why I didn't like Beloved by Toni Morrison. Can I just say, I swear to God, I am not doing this on purpose. I don't enjoy being the only person who doesn't like something that is universally loved by everybody else. Except maybe A Court of Thorns and Roses, a little bit. But genuinely, I went into Beloved wanting to really enjoy it. But I just didn't. So the story of Beloved primarily follows the character of Sethi, who is a woman who has escaped slavery in the southern states and is now living in Cincinnati. It jumps over various different time periods, but essentially Sethi moved in with the mother of the father of her children, 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. And effectively the house is haunted by the ghost of one of the girls who died at Sethi's hands when she was very, very young. So the place where Sethi escaped from was known as Sweet Home, and the plot starts to escalate when Paul D., a man who was also enslaved at Sweet Home, comes to find Sethi many years later after her escape. And that's kind of where the plot starts to take off. Essentially what ends up happening is the ghost of the baby, Beloved, manifests as a corporeal person and comes to the house and is the same age that Beloved the child would have been had she survived. That kind of sounds like I was giving you spoilers, but to be honest, the blurb of the book pretty much tells you all of that, so you kind of know this all going in. How the story unfolds is essentially we move backwards and forwards in time where we start to see what Sethi's life was like, how she managed to escape from Sweet Home and end up where she was, and the circumstances leading up to Beloved's death in the past, and in the present, what the impact of Beloved coming back to live with her mother and her sister Denver are, what the repercussions of that are in the present day. So far so good. I mean, what I've described is a compelling story with the potential for a lot of interesting characters. And there is a lot to admire in this. The way that the language is used, it is quite clear that Toni Morrison is a very, very talented writer. And some of the aspects of this, so things like the description of life at Sweet Home, both under the care of a previous owner who was much more progressive versus a later owner who essentially saw the people that he had as property, and not just property but animals, and the level of cruelty that they endured at his hands. All that is described in a really harrowing way, which is both engaging and important. So what is it that I don't like about it? And it boils down to a few different things. I think, first of all, as I said, Toni Morrison is a very, very talented writer, but there's a lot going on. There are jumps from whose perspective you're viewing the story from, so it can either be Sethi's or Paul D's or Sethi's daughter Denver, or occasionally Beloved herself, or occasionally Baby Suggs the grandmother. You are jumping from all of these different perspectives. You are jumping back and forward through time at multiple times. There's also a large element of supernatural and magical realism in it, combined with a whole lot of story being told through metaphor as well. And what that ends up leaving you with is a really confusing text to get your head around. It is something where I found myself constantly flicking back and forth, trying to establish where the perspective changed, where the time frame changed, because frankly, there's very, very little to indicate when these changes happen, and it just makes for an extraordinarily confusing narrative. And it feels like the craft of trying to put the story in that particular way outweighed things like plot and character. The story has got these tropes of horror, because effectively this is a horror story in many ways. It is the story of a infant who dies and comes back angry as, first of all, a ghost, and then secondly, as a grown woman who then becomes part of their lives. It sounds like a really interesting prospect, but there isn't really any explanation as to how any of this came about. And I'm all in favour of ambiguity. I don't mind if a story doesn't explain to you how something has happened. But I kind of like to have the impression that the author knows and is giving you enough information for you to try and draw your own conclusions. In this, I don't think Toni Morrison gave any thought as to how Beloved came back. That was just the story she wanted to tell, and she just made Beloved come back without giving any thought as to how that was actually going to work. And while she's kind of borrowing liberally from horror and ghost story tropes, it almost feels like she's kind of ashamed of them. It's like, it's literary fiction, so therefore it's above such things as tropes from genre fiction, so it's almost like she shoves that to the side, which again didn't really appeal to me. So it was difficult to read and it was confusing, and I don't mind difficult to read and confusing, but I think the kind of last straw for me was the characters, because I found it extraordinarily difficult to have sympathy for any of them. I mean, the four primary characters that you got to see in this were Beloved, Denver, Sethi, and Paul D. And all of them just came across as incredibly selfish and self-centered. And that especially was the case for me with the primary character of Sethi. To try and explain why the character of Sethi rubbed me up the wrong way, I'm going to share something a little bit personal now. So just over 15 years ago, my wife and I had a daughter, and she was born with a heart condition. And unfortunately, she passed away 2 days after she was born. So obviously, losing a child is an extraordinarily difficult experience and has a fundamental impact on you for many years to come. Now, as part of that experience, we met other parents who had had similar experiences to us. And occasionally we met someone who it became, understandably, all-consuming for them. But where I have a bit of a problem with that is there are some parents who've lost a child, and the child that they lost occupies all of their attention at the expense of the children that they've still got. Now, I realise this could be quite judgmental, but I struggle to sympathise with that mindset of prioritising your attention towards a child that has died above the children that are still living. I struggle to sympathise with that perspective in real life, and I have to hand it to Toni Morrison that she was able to create a realistic character in Sethi who embodies that in fiction, but it is a character, even though I'm primed to sympathise with a parent going through grief, I could not sympathise with the character, aside from what she'd actually done in the first place. Putting that to one side, I struggled to sympathise with her as a character in the way that she prioritised the dead child over the living one. And that, for me, was the straw that broke the camel's back when it came to the story of Beloved. So it was difficult to read, as in the mechanics of actually reading it were hard. The story and the plotting didn't work for me. I felt like the mechanics of how the story was told was much more important to the author than the story itself. And I really could not properly empathize with any of the characters in the story either. And as a result, I can't think of another book in recent memory that felt like so much of a chore when picking it up as Beloved did. By the way, the reason I read Beloved is as part of the I'm with the Band book club, which was arranged by MJ over at Reading This Life, where every single month we read a book that has been banned or challenged in US schools to draw attention to the amount of books that are being withdrawn from US schools because people take exception to them. And even though I did not like Beloved, it doesn't mean other people should not get the chance to read it. So if you're interested in getting involved, I'll put the link down to the Fable book club in the description below. And if you'd like to see how I get on with some of the other banned books, please consider subscribing to the channel or click on the link that I put up above and you can see what I thought of A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. So Beloved was not for me. I can see the skill and artistry at work. I can understand the themes that Toni Morrison wanted to share. But regardless, I really, really didn't enjoy it. And if I'm honest, I can't see myself picking up another Toni Morrison book in the foreseeable future. Anyway, if you've read Beloved and you think I'm really missing the point on some of this, please put your thoughts in the comments below because I'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching this. I really appreciate you taking the time to do that, and take care.